In a world full of shadows, secrets don't stay buried for long. Open the door, step into the unknown. This is the Lots Full Podcast.
In the early hours of June 10th, 1912, one of the most horrific unsolved crimes in American history unfolded in the small town of Villisca, Iowa. An unknown assailant brutally murdered 8 people: the well-respected Moore family of 6 and 2 young house guests, with an axe as they slept in the Moore home. The shocking crime, known as the Villisca Axe Murders, sent waves of panic through the region and baffled law enforcement for decades. Despite a lengthy investigation and several suspects brought to trial, no one was ever convicted of the murders, and the case remains officially unsolved. Over a century later, the Villisca murders continue to fascinate historians and true crime enthusiasts, generating numerous theories, from local grudges and mad preachers to the possibility of a roving serial killer. And on that lovely note, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lots Full Podcast. It's your hosts, Arkansas Dave and Dakota. We're very glad to have y'all here.
Another week, another fun topic.
If y'all see me keep looking up, I got the NASCAR race on and priorities. So
all things missing is Budweiser in his hand.
Well, my guy is sponsored by Castrol, so.
Budweiser and NASCAR go hand in hand, regardless.
I'm one of those rednecks that likes to watch cars going around in a circle.
Demolition Derby's a little bit more entertaining, though.
Do what?
A Demolition Derby's a little bit more entertaining.
Oh, this is Daytona, so it could possibly devolve into a Demolition Derby. This is the first dual race, so.
Yay.
Well, have you ever heard about this case, Dave?
I have not.
I'm surprised. It's a pretty popular topic.
Listen, man, I live under a rock like Patrick Star, okay? I work, eat, and sleep. That's it.
See, I wanted to cover it because there's several theories, but there's one specific theory that I really buy into, and you don't really see anybody talk about it.
Okay.
This is a supposedly haunted location also. We're not really getting into that tonight. We may touch on it a little bit, but that's not the point. The point of this topic is the actual crime itself.
Okay.
We might touch on the hauntings and stuff at a later time, but I wanted us to go over the actual crime and the theories that persist inside of that.
Uh-huh.
So
we're in 1912 in Villisca, Iowa.
Villisca, Iowa. Very small town.
Okay, where is Villisca, Iowa near?
So, Villisca, Iowa.
I would do it, but I don't have a laptop or tablet or anything.
I'm looking it up right now. Villisca is on 71, close to 34, and the nearest major city. It's a little bit southwest of Des Moines, not far from the Missouri state line.
Okay.
I never went through there because I stayed on 35. I always went through Eagleville.
Well,
but
do this. You said it's southwest of Des Moines. See how close it is to Pella, Iowa.
To where?
Pella.
Pella?
Pella.
Spell that.
Pella.
Pella?
Possible.
It's 2 hours and 31 minutes.
Okay.
Pella is southeast of Des Moines.
So we're on the other side of the state then.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking, we got family up in that particular area. So,
Oh, do you?
yeah. Preacher man. So,
Funny you say that, and we'll get to that. That's
yeah.
one of the theories. One of the theories involves a specific preacher.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That acts as the wrath of God, huh?
Oh, no. No, not quite.
Let's jump off in this.
All right. So, a little bit of historical context to start off. The Moore family home in Villisca, now known as the Villisca Axe Murder House, was restored to its 1912 condition and is open to tours as a historical site. In 1912, Villisca was a modest, tight-knit town of around 2,000 residents in southwestern Iowa. It was a prosperous little community, the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other on the street and people generally felt safe enough to leave their doors unlocked at night. Serious crime was virtually unheard of in Villisca, so the violent mass murder of an entire family was a nearly unthinkable event. Indeed, the crime's impact on Iowa was so profound that it spurred major changes in law enforcement. The outrage over the unsolved killings helped lead to the creation of a state criminal investigations bureau, the precursor to today's Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation, to improve future responses to such crime. Beyond Villisca, it is notable that the early 1910s saw a spike in bizarre family axe murders across the Midwest and elsewhere, suggesting a broader context of transient violence. Newspapers of the time speculated whether an axe man was roaming from town to town. In fact, within days of the Villisca murders, detectives and journalists began drawing parallels between the Villisca case and other recent unsolved axe slayings of entire families in places like Colorado Springs, Colorado, Monmouth, Illinois, and Paola, Kansas, all of which had occurred in 1911 and 1912 with eerie similarities. This broader pattern, discussed further in the man on the train theory section to come, led some to wonder if America was facing one of its first serial killers, at a time when that concept was not yet well understood. Locally, however, many in Villisca initially believed the killer must have been someone with a personal vendetta against Josiah Joe Moore or his family, given the brutality of the crime. As the following sections will detail, the investigation into the Villisca Axe murders would span several years and yield a range of suspects, reflecting both the town's shattered sense of security and the law enforcement challenges of the era.
Okay. We had a discussion. If I remember correctly, this has been several episodes back about another axe murder.
Mm-hmm.
Was it around about the same time?
You're talking about in the Magnolia episode.
No. This is a different one. This is one of the true crime ones we did.
Only other true crime one that we did was Sauter family, right?
Unless I dreamed it.
You might have dreamed it. The only other axe murder I remember us talking about on the podcast was Magnolia.
No, it wasn't the Magnolia. But there's a theory about somebody hopping the train.
I may have mentioned this, but we didn't go into real deep detail.
Yeah, that might be what it is. Who knows? But anyhow, so we're going Midwest, 1910, 1911, 1912 Axe Murders.
Well, there are several murders. I'll just go ahead and say this now. I put a lot of emphasis in the man on the train theory in this document that I typed up
Mm-hmm.
because that's the theory I strongly buy into. So, fair warning, guys. There's going to be a little bias in this episode.
Well, I'm kind of leaning that way, especially with eerie similarities. That's the
And
that's
it
the part they're
frustrates me
covering.
and it frustrates me that nobody talks about the man on the train.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's such a blatantly obvious conclusion to come to. Why is nobody talking about it? You know?
Right. And so, like, okay, we're talking 1912. There's no DNA. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, investigation tactics are nowhere near what they are now.
Even if there
Where,
was DNA, as you'll see when we get into like the investigation, it was so fucking contaminated from the start.
yeah, and then we're talking rural Iowa, early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
Early 1900s Midwest, there ain't fucking shit out there
Yeah.
for miles. I mean, miles. There still ain't nothing out there for miles.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'll send you this picture of the map of Villisca. Of where Villisca is, so you can see, like, it's in the middle of fucking nowhere. Okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't see it right now, but you'll see it after we get off. And like I said, it's in the middle of fucking nowhere. Okay? Judging by the distance on the map, it appears to be about 2 hours southwest of Des Moines.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there thinking, rail line, it's got to be fairly close.
It is. And we'll get into that.
So, but all right. Let's keep
Now,
on
the man
trucking.
on the train theory includes several murders that happened around that time.
Okay.
They range all the way from not only Villisca, but they go to the East Coast. They go almost all the way to the West Coast and as far south as San Antonio.
Damn.
So,
But
I
you'd have
didn't
to
go that in detail on it, but just so you know. And anybody that wants to know more about that, read the fucking Man on the Train book. Like, it's all laid out there. They even include some murders that some people have said could be linked and then explain why they're not.
Yeah.
And it's written by a former detective, former homicide detective.
Well, I mean, you'd have to look at the dates and kind of like, okay, because we're still using what, steam power locomotives at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to go near as fast as what we have now. So you're going to go, okay, you can cover this much time and this amount of, or this many miles in this much time, like where
Mm-hmm.
your intersections are at and stuff like that.
Yeah, when we get to the Man on the Train theory section, I will lay out the criteria that this detective used to determine whether or not a case was going to be considered as linked.
Yeah.
Not all cases that fit this criteria were ultimately determined in the book as linked, but this is the criteria he used to look into it.
Right.
Okay? Well, you want to get into the actual crime itself?
Let's get into the actual crime itself. Let's see who got hacked up.
All right. On Sunday, June 9th, 1912, the Moore family spent a pleasant evening at the Presbyterian Church where a well-attended Children's Day program was held. Sarah Moore, 39, had helped coordinate the event, and her 4 children, Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd 7, and Paul 5 each participated with recitations. Accompanying them were two neighbor girls, Lena Stillinger, 12, and Ina Stillinger, 8, who had been invited by Catherine for a sleepover at the Moore house that night. The church event concluded around 9:30 p.m., and the Moores and Stillinger sisters walked home to 508 East 2nd Street, arriving shortly before 10 p.m. The weather was cool and damp as they settled in for the night, unknowingly entering the final hours of their lives. Sometime after midnight in the early hours of June 10, 1912, an intruder entered the wooden two-story Moore house. It's believed the killer either slipped in through an unlocked door, which was not uncommon in Villisca at the time, or was already hiding on the property. Investigators later found 2 cigarette butts in the attic and a depression in the hay of the barn loft with a view of the house. Signs that the perpetrator might have lurked there, watching and waiting for the family to fall asleep. Carrying a kerosene oil lamp taken from the home, the intruder had bent down the lamp's wick and removed the glass chimney to dim the flame to a faint glow. In the other hand, the stranger gripped an axe. Chillingly, it was Joe Moore's own axe, retrieved from where it was usually kept in the backyard. Moving by the lamp's weak light, the intruder bypassed the downstairs guest room where the Stillinger sisters slept and crept up the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor. The killer seemed to know the house layout, or intuit. Heading first to the master bedroom where 43-year-old Josiah Moore and his wife Sarah lay asleep. In a sudden frenzy of violence, the attacker brought the blunt side of the axe blade down on Joe Moore's skull as he slept, striking with such force that it gouged the ceiling above the bed. Joe likely died instantly from the massive head trauma. The assailant then swung the axe on Sarah before she could fully wake or cry out, killing her with brutal blows to the head. Having eliminated the 2 adults, the killer next went into the adjacent bedroom where the 4 Moore children were sleeping. One by one, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and little Paul were bludgeoned in their beds with the axe's heavy blunt end. The attack was so swift and merciless that none of the children managed to fully wake or escape their blankets, and all were killed by severe head wounds similar to those of their parents. Throughout these murders upstairs, the Stillinger girls downstairs remained undisturbed in the guest room. Finally, the killer descended the stairs and entered the first-floor guest bedroom, where Lena and Ina Stillinger slept. There, the slaughter continued. Ina appears to have been killed as she slept, but evidence suggests Lena awoke in those last moments. Lena's body was found partly sideways on the bed with a defensive wound on her arm, indicating she may have tried to fend off the attack. She was struck and killed, and her nightgown was pushed up to her waist. Early investigators wondered if the killer had sexually molested or posed Lena's body. Her undergarments were removed and her body arranged, but doctors found no evidence of sexual assault. The prevailing view is that the murderer's posing of Lena was part of a psychologically driven ritual or staging of the crime scene. What the murderer did after killing all 8 victims is perhaps as disturbing as the murders themselves. Rather than fleeing immediately, the killer lingered inside the house for an extended period in the dead of night. At some point, he methodically covered the faces of Joe and Sarah Moore with bedcloths and placed clothing over the faces of the children in their beds. He also draped cloths or skirts over every mirror and glass window pane in the house, as if to hide the carnage from view, or perhaps to hide himself from any eyes living or dead. The bloodied axe was left downstairs in the bedroom where the Stillinger girls were found, but the killer took the time to wipe the axe clean of blood and fingerprints. In a bizarre touch that continues to mystify investigators, a 4-pound slab of uncooked bacon was found propped against the wall in the same room, wrapped in a dish towel near a short piece of iron or keychain that did not belong to the Moores. On the kitchen table, police found a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water, indicating the murderer prepared a meal or at least washed up in the kitchen after the killings. All of these ritualistic elements, covered mirrors, lamps with chimneys removed, a basin of bloody water, and even the slab of bacon, would later be noted as signature behavior seen in other axe murder cases in that area, lending weight to the theory of a single serial perpetrator. Sometime before dawn, the killer finally departed the scene. Investigators believe the murderer left between 4 and 5 a.m., locking the doors behind him and taking the house keys, which were never found. The quiet little white house sat in eerie silence as the sun rose on Monday, June 10th, with 8 lifeless victims still in their beds. Discovery of the bodies came early that Monday morning. Around 7 a.m., the Moore's next-door neighbor, Mary Peckham, grew concerned that she had not seen any sign of the usually active family. Mary had been up by 5 a.m. to do her laundry, and by now the Moore's house was unnaturally still. No one doing chores, no children playing outside, and even the Moore's chickens and horses sounded restless, having not been tended to. Mary knocked on the Moore's door repeatedly. When nobody answered, she tried to peek in the windows, but found all the curtains tightly drawn. She tested both the front and back doors and found them locked from the inside. Alarmed, Mary phoned Josiah's brother Ross Moore and asked him to come over to check on the family. Ross arrived around 8 a.m. with his copy of the house key. He let himself in through the front door while Mrs. Peckham stood on the porch. The house was dim and quiet. Ross first opened the door to the downstairs guest bedroom and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. 2 figures on the bed covered with blood-soaked sheets, and a lifeless hand visible beneath the edge of the covering. Blood splatter stained the bedstead and walls. Overwhelmed, Ross rushed back to the porch and told Mary Peckham to fetch Villisca's marshal, Henry Hank Horton. At once, something terrible has happened here, he exclaimed. And we'll stop right there before the marshal arrives to get your thoughts, because that's a lot of information.
Okay. One, I think they got when he left wrong. I'm gonna tell you why.
The time he left, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
I think he left after the neighbor showed up.
Okay.
Why would he leave? What was it? A chain, uncooked food, and a slab of bacon?
An uneaten meal on the table, and then the slab of bacon in the room with the Stillinger girl.
That tells me he left in haste.
It's possible.
Is what
I
that
have
tells.
a reason to believe he wasn't in the home, but when Mary Peckham came and knocked on the door, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Taking the parents out first. That's methodical. He knew that there were kids in the house, so he took out the adults first so that they couldn't defend the kids.
Yep, I agree.
So,
I saw faces you were making as I was describing what happened.
Yeah,
and I agree with you.
The last one, I would say probably 75%, maybe more certainty. He may have messed with the last girl. How old was she again?
It's entirely possible.
How old was the last one?
That was Lena Stillinger, and she was, I believe, 12. Let me go back and look. Yeah, Lena Stillinger, 12.
So more than likely pedophilia, because you're not going to do what he did, but there's a reason he did that. That's most definitely pedophilia.
100%. 100%.
And he scoped the place out. Most definitely scoped it out. He was in the barn. You're not going to smoke 2 cigarettes in the barn and just not watch. More than likely, if I had to guess, he was there probably early that morning, the start of the previous day, if not before,
Mm-hmm.
just chilling out, safe, dry, and everything. But
I think there was specific like brutality in the fact that he used the blunt side of the
yeah,
axe.
I found that a little strange. That's a hammer murderer.
I've heard it theorized that he used the blunt side so that he didn't have to worry about the sharpened side of the axe getting stuck in the skulls
Yeah, I mean that makes
like it
sense.
does in wood sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
But
But
it's still just like an axe murder is brutal enough already, and to use the blunt side of the axe, like
yeah,
that shows malice. You know,
yeah,
that shows
I'm
rage, in my opinion.
right. But I also think he was one. He wanted the kills to be swift and as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want the axe to get stuck. Makes sense.
And I will say, to this day, if you go to Villisca, to the house
Mm,
upstairs where the parents were killed, you can still see the mark in the ceiling where the axe hit.
yeah. So he grabbed, swung up. So he's probably a fairly tall man. We're gonna say
Mm-hmm.
ceilings in are still 7, 8 foot tall, roughly. So he's probably fairly tall. Because if I swung an axe, I'm probably not
Mm-hmm.
going to hit the ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, you short motherfucker.
Fuck you. Um,
Oompa Loompa ass.
listen, listen. There's not an Oompa Loompa fetish over here. When I talk about Oompa Loompas, I don't have an Oompa Loompa fetish. Anyhow,
No.
so this guy's probably fairly tall and everything. Probably fairly strong too, because even
Mm-hmm.
with an axe, you're still going to have to swing with some pretty good force. I'm not saying a weak
And
person.
I'm not going to have Natalie put them in here, but I will say the crime scene photos are available to view. I've seen them.
So
I don't believe in censorship. I don't believe in censoring ourselves. But those are so brutal that I do not feel comfortable sharing them with people.
well, I wouldn't either due to the fact there's children involved in it. If it's just adults, maybe
Well, yeah. Even the adults though, it's too much. I'm not going to put that out there. You know,
right.
it's just way too brutal.
Yeah. Now, him covering windows and mirrors and all that. I think the haunting. I think him killing haunts him. I think he's dealing with a mental disorder of some sort. More
Okay.
than likely, if I had to guess, probably schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
More than likely. Um, just to the fact schizophrenia is normally the most violent of the disorders. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now it could also be possessed. I don't know. Um, him cleaning up afterwards makes sense due to the fact that you don't want to be walking around town. You just killed a bunch of fucking people and covered in blood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense. Covering the windows, probably didn't want people to peek in, um, just in case somebody did come by early or come home late that he didn't see.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my thought process at the moment.
I'm with you. Well, you want to get into the initial investigation?
Let's get into the initial investigation.
We're past the heavy part now. Like, the heavy shit is the description of the crime. Like, we're past that. Um, so Marshal Hank Horton arrived around 8:30 a.m. and conducted a cursory search of the home. It did not take long for the awful truth to become clear. Horton found somebody murdered in every bed of the house, as he later described it. All 8 victims, the Moores and the 2 Stillinger girls, had been bludgeoned to death with the blunt side of an axe while they slept. The gruesome scene was beyond anything the local authorities had ever witnessed. The murder weapon, Joe's axe, was found in the downstairs room near the girls, and the strange tableau of covered mirrors, uneaten food, and the slab of bacon quickly indicated to officials that this was no ordinary homicide. Marshal Horton immediately summoned additional help. Within the hour, doctors and the county coroner, Dr. L.A. Lindquist, a minister, and other officials had arrived to examine the scene. News of the atrocity spread rapidly through the town. At 8:45, the local telephone operator sent out a general all call to Villisca residents, notifying them that something terrible had happened at the Moore home. What happened next would horrify modern forensic experts. Curious townspeople swarmed the crime scene before it could be secured. Despite warnings from Dr. F.S. Williams, one of the first physicians on site, that "don't go in there, boys, you'll regret it until the last day of your life," at least 75 to 100 people pushed their way into the Moore house over the next few hours. Throngs of onlookers traipsed through every room of the house, inadvertently and sometimes deliberately contaminating evidence. In the chaos, the murder weapon was even picked up and handled by gawkers. One man infamously took a fragment of Joe Moore's skull as a macabre souvenir. The home was effectively trampled by a mob before law enforcement could establish a perimeter. Dr. Lindquist, the coroner, was appalled when he arrived around 9 a.m. to find the crime scene overrun with townsfolk. Belatedly, officials took action to secure the site. Villisca fortunately had a National Guard armory, and by 10:30 a.m., National Guard troops were brought in to cordon off the house and evict the crowd. Once the scene was finally closed to the public, investigators began the grim task of documenting evidence, what little remained untainted, and arranging for the victims' removal. The bodies of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters remained in the house nearly all that day as the coroner impaneled a jury and conducted a preliminary inquest on site. Not until 10 p.m. that night, almost 24 hours after the murders, did Coroner Lindquist authorize the local undertaker to begin removing the bodies. The victims were transported to the fire station, which served as a temporary morgue, by around 2 a.m. on June 11th. Villisca, in the span of a single day, had transformed from a pretty place to, as some newspapers quip, an evil place of nightmares. The brutality of the crime, the youth of the victims, and the utter lack of an immediate culprit left the community reeling. As the funerals were held on June 12th in Villisca's town square, drawing thousands of mourners from around the region, one question hung heavy in the air. Who could have done such a thing, and why?
Okay. I see where you said DNA, the evidence was basically trashed. And that's kind of crazy, though. I
Yeah,
mean,
even if they had DNA.
that's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But um, that many people showed up and just
I'm
ran
listening to
super
you, but as
fast.
I was reading that, I glanced up and I saw a wreck on the race, and I'm trying to make sure my guy wasn't in it.
Ah,
No, he wasn't, but two of his teammates were.
oh
Okay.
shit.
Sorry. So,
Let's keep going.
the investigation into the Villisca Axe murder spanned many years, involving numerous twists and turns. I will now go through a timeline of key events in the case's history from the night of the crime through the subsequent probes and legal proceedings. Okay?
Okay.
So, as we know, June 9th in the evening, the Moore family and Stillinger sisters attend a church Children's Day program. They return to the Moore home by 10 p.m., where all 8 settle in for the night. It is the last time they are seen alive. Early hours of June 10th, 1912, an unknown assailant enters the Moore house after midnight and murders Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and Lena Ina Stillinger with an axe. The killer leaves before dawn, locking the doors behind and disappearing without a trace. On the morning of June 10th, by 8:30 a.m., neighbor Mary Peckham and Josiah's brother Ross discover the crime scene and alert Marshal Hank Horton. I'm just going to call him Marshal Horton from now on because he has too many fucking H's in his name. Authorities and many townspeople converge on the house. The crime scene is badly compromised by onlookers until the National Guard secures it around 10:30 a.m. News of the massacre spreads nationwide by wire and press reports that same day. June 10th and 11th. Initial investigations begin. Bloodhounds are brought in but fail to pick up a useful trail, likely due to contamination. Local law enforcement, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the crime, seek help from state officials and private detectives. The sheer brutality of the murders and lack of clear motives stymie the first efforts. No obvious suspect is found in the immediate vicinity. June 12th. The victim's funeral is held June 12th, drawing an enormous crowd in Villisca. With emotions high, various leads are pursued. Early suspicion falls on Sam Moyer, Josiah Moore's brother-in-law, because he had a history of quarrels with Joe and had allegedly threatened to kill him in the past. Moyer is tracked to Nebraska and arrested on June 13, 1912. However, after questioning, Moyer provides an alibi. He had been in another town on the night of the murders, and is released when no evidence ties him to the scene. Moyer's arrest and clearance underscore the desperation to find any suspect in the immediate aftermath. Mid-June 1912. Several transient suspects are detained and investigated. June 14th and 15th, authorities in Monmouth, Illinois arrest a man named Joe Ricks, who is found with blood-stained shoes, after a Villisca local reported encountering a strange man asking for directions to the Moore house before the murders. Villisca's county attorney and relative of the Moores traveled to Monmouth with young Faye Van Gilder, the Moore's niece, to see if she can identify Ricks as the same stranger. Faye concludes Joe Ricks is not the man she saw near the Moore home. His bloody shoes turned out to be from a trade with a tramp, and Ricks is cleared from involvement. Meanwhile, a gentleman tramp named Andy Sawyer is picked up in Omaha for suspicious behavior. He had been obsessively following news of the Villisca murders and even sleeping with an axe by his bed. After investigation, Sawyer too is released. He had been working in another town the night of the murders, and his employer vouched for his alibi. As detectives struggle for leads, the idea emerges that Villisca's murderer might not be local at all, but rather part of a pattern of similar crimes. Law officers in other states began communicating about the Villisca case. Notably, authorities in Colorado Springs contact Iowa officials to point out striking parallels between the Villisca murders and an unsolved September 1911 axe murder of 2 families in Colorado Springs. In both cases, windows were covered, victims' heads covered, an oil lamp was left with the chimney removed, and the killer washed at the scene. July of 1912, with no arrests made, rewards are offered, and a new Montgomery County grand jury is convened to review evidence. Dozens of witnesses are called. The crime remains front-page news across Iowa, and private detectives from agencies like the Burns Detective Agency are hired by both anxious citizens and grieving relatives to crack the case. As summer wears on, public frustration grows to the at the lack of progress. September 1912. The trail is largely cold by fall. Detectives pursue sporadic leads. For example, a man named John Boland is arrested in Missouri in late June 1912 after writing bizarre letters about visions of killing people without the mark of the Lord, but he is found to have no connection. Another suspect, an African American man named Frank Roberts, is arrested in July in Sioux City and accused of the Villisca murders, but he too has an alibi. He was on vacation in another town and is released. Such false leads reinforce that the real killer left virtually no trace. May 1913. The case takes an intriguing turn when an agent of the U.S. Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation, the early version of the FBI, Special Agent Matthew McLaury, publishes an analysis suggesting the Villisca murders were part of a series of at least 10 axe murders in the Midwest. McLaury's report theorizes that one man committed multiple family annihilations, and he identifies a suspect, Henry Lee Moore, no relation to Josiah Moore. Henry Lee Moore was an ex-convict who had been released from prison shortly before the Midwest murder spree and, in a grim coincidence, would later be convicted of murdering his own mother and grandmother with an axe in Missouri in late 1912. McLaury suspects Henry Moore could be the Axeman responsible for Villisca and other cases, though this theory is largely speculative at the time. Later investigators would cast doubt on Henry Moore as a serial killer, noting his motive in killing his relatives was financial, and that it would be unusual for a serial killer to then murder his own family. Nonetheless, McLaury's multi-murder theory was the precursor to what modern researchers would revisit as the man on the train theory. How much longer do I have this?
So, we've got, at this point, we've interviewed, suspected multiple people. Now, what people don't, I don't know, some people might not understand what tramp means. All tramp is a hobo on a train.
Oh,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
It's an old
Yeah.
way of saying hobo. Hobo is more or less a new age term.
Right.
Now, his brother-in-law traded shoes with
Yeah,
one of
his
these.
brother-in-law threatened to kill him.
Yeah, but traded shoes.
No, the brother-in-law wasn't the one that traded shoes. But his brother-in-law had threatened to kill him in the
Yeah,
past.
I don't think it's going to be his brother-in-law. I mean, brother-in-law may have threatened to kill him because he upset his sister, and well, you know how that is. Big brother, he's got to offend little sister or big sister, whatever. Most time, nothing ever comes to that, even to this day, unless it's something really bad. But the trading of the shoes with the hobo, I think there might be something in there, especially in Bloodstain,
Yeah.
because why would the hobo want to trade shoes? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You would think he'd want to keep his shoes.
Yeah.
Maybe they're nice. Maybe they're comfy.
And the shoes were bloodstained.
Exactly. Now he's going to try to
Yeah.
get rid of them. So they're like, oh, hey, I can get that out because I cut my hand and I got blood all over them. That's a simple
Yeah.
excuse. Um,
Yep.
it sounds like to me they're grasping at straws. I think the FBI, well, the
They
precursor to
are.
the FBI is on to something. It does sound like the Colorado Springs murders or murderer. Um,
Keep
fit,
talking. I'm getting up to get me some water, but I can hear you, so keep talking.
but I do think the Colorado Springs murder fits into this. Due to the fact that the similarities of what has happened being washed and everything, um, covering everything up, covering the faces. Question is, did he try to make a meal for himself before he left? Did he eat a meal? So there's that question. So now these other axe murders, I know we'll get into them a little bit. I think I'm hearing coyotes outside.
Well, the dogs next door were going wild earlier.
No, this is most definitely,
You ready to continue with this timeline?
yeah, let's hit the timeline. Let's go into the future a little bit so we can find.
What were you about to say? This is most definitely what?
Oh, I don't remember.
December 1913, an unexpected civil lawsuit shines a spotlight on the case. Villisca resident Mary Every accuses a local man, Reverend W.H. Kelly, not to be confused with somebody we'll mention earlier, or we'll mention later, of slander for allegedly accusing her estranged husband of the murders. This and other minor court actions underscore how this unsolved crime bred rumor and paranoia, though they do not solve the mystery. 1914, the focus shifts dramatically to a new suspect, Reverend George Kelly, a peculiar English-born itinerant minister. In June 1914, Reverend Kelly is arrested in South Dakota, not for the murders, but for sending obscene letters through the mail to women who had applied to be a stenographer. Kelly is a diminutive, erratic man with a known history of mental illness and sexual deviance, and notably, he had been in Villisca on the night of the murders. Iowa authorities, upon learning of Kelly's arrest and committal to a mental hospital, began investigating Kelly's possible connections to Villisca. 2 years have passed since the crime, but Kelly's name had been on a periphery of suspicion due to his bizarre behavior. He had shown intense interest in the case and even masqueraded as a detective to tour the Moore house. Now, with Kelly institutionalized, investigators quietly collect evidence against him. 1916. By this time, Villisca's infamous unsolved murders have become a political issue in Iowa. A new state attorney general, Horace Havner, takes office and vows to resolve the case. Separately, private detective James Newton Wilkerson of the Burns Agency aggressively pursues his own theory targeting a local politician, Iowa State Senator Frank F. Jones, as the mastermind. More about this in the suspects section. In July 1916, Detective Wilkerson succeeds in convincing a Montgomery County grand jury to convene and consider evidence that Senator Jones hired a killer to wipe out the Moore family. Acting on Wilkerson's information, authorities arrest William Blackie Mansfield, a suspected hitman, and bring him from Kansas City to Iowa in late July 1916. Mansfield is interrogated about Villisca and also a string of similar axe murders, including the killing of his own in-laws in Illinois in 1914. However, Mansfield has an ironclad alibi. Payroll records show he was working in Illinois on the dates of the Villisca murders and the Paola, Kansas murders for the crime scenes, far from the crime scenes. On July 21st, 1916, the grand jury fails to indict Mansfield and he is released for lack of evidence. Mansfield later wins a slander lawsuit against Wilkerson for wrongful accusation, and the Burns detectives' insistence on Jones's guilt creates bitter divisions in the community and in law enforcement. 1917. The case reaches a climax of sorts in 1917. In spring of that year, Attorney General Havner and the Montgomery County Attorney focus on building a case against Reverend George Kelly. A grand jury convenes in Montgomery County in April 1917 and indicts Reverend Kelly for the murder of 12-year-old Lena Stillinger. Prosecutors chose Lena's murder in particular, believing they have the strongest evidence for that charge. Kelly, who by now has been released from the asylum and was living in Kansas, is arrested and brought back to Iowa to stand trial. Under intense interrogation that summer, the unstable minister confesses to the murders on August 31st, 1917, claiming he heard God's voice telling him, "Suffer the children to come unto me," which is a biblical reference, and that "slay utterly" was the divine command that drove him to kill. This confession is full of vivid detail. Kelly claims, for instance, he killed the children upstairs first, and then the ones downstairs in obedience to the voice of God. However, Kelly almost immediately recants his confession, alleging he was coerced or that his mental illness made him imagine things. The Kelly trial begins on September 5th, 1917 in Red Oak, Iowa. It is a sensational proceeding, drawing intense media coverage. During the trial, many irregularities and sensational accusations surface, including claims that Detective Wilkerson, still championing the Frank Jones theory, had tampered with witnesses and even engineered a burglary to frame Senator Jones. After all this drama, Reverend Kelly's first trial ends in a hung jury. 11 jurors voted for acquittal, 1 for conviction. A second trial for Kelly is held in November 1917. This time the jury votes to acquit him of all charges. With Kelly's acquittal, the last serious attempt at prosecution in the Villisca case comes to an end. After 1917, the Villisca murder case goes cold. By the end of 1917, 5 years after the crime, no one has been held accountable for the 8 murders. Public interest gradually wanes as other events, World War I, for example, come to dominate headlines. Over the subsequent decades, the Villisca case remains officially open but stagnant. Occasional suspects or deathbed confessions crop up. For instance, in 1931, a prisoner in Colorado purportedly confessed, but nothing credible came of it. And various investigators, journalists, and locals continue to puzzle over the mystery in the years to follow. But no new charges are ever brought. The Moore House itself eventually became a rental property and later an infamous haunted house attraction, as the legend of Villisca's Axe Murders lived on in American folklore. It would be many decades later, with fresh eyes and modern analytical techniques, that researchers would revive the Villisca investigation and propose new theories.
Okay.
So with all of that laid out, what do you think?
Reverend
Kelly?
Reverend Kelly.
Okay.
I see why they think that he may have done it.
So originally when I heard this case, I thought Reverend Kelly was the culprit.
My question is one, how did Reverend Kelly leave Villisca? 2, did they bring the person in that swapped shoes with said hobo?
So they went to they didn't bring him in, but the Moore's niece said she saw a stranger asking for directions to the Moore house. Okay. They
Okay.
took her to that guy and she said, "This isn't the stranger I saw."
But it wasn't Reverend Kelly they asked about.
No.
So
No,
why
they
did...
knew who Reverend Kelly was. Reverend Kelly was a minister that was brought in for that children's church event.
Yeah. So my next question is, was Reverend Kelly in Colorado Springs? When that one happened, see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, yeah.
Because if he was
He
there in
was a traveling preacher that would go to different churches. He didn't
right,
really have a church of his own.
correct. But if he was in Colorado Springs when those murders happened,
Yeah,
then guess what? That ties him very strongly to both murders.
yeah.
Okay? When he said God commanded him, I don't think this is God commanding him. I'm thinking
No.
he is either being a preacher, he's probably schizophrenic.
Well,
Okay.
I want to say this real quick. I don't ever want to hear any of you accusing me of constantly going to demonic possession. That includes you, Dave,
Yeah.
because originally I bought into the Reverend Kelly theory, okay? And I thought it was demonic possession, or at least demonic influence.
Right.
The
Well,
more research I've done into this, I think Reverend Kelly, I don't want to call him innocent because I think he was a pervert and a pedophile, but I don't think he committed these murders.
yeah. Um, I don't think it's probably gonna be demonic. I think it's gonna be somebody that's schizophrenic.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion and
Yeah.
everything.
Well, you want to get into the suspects and theories?
Let's get into the suspects and theories.
All right. First suspect and theory, Senator Frank F. Jones and the hired killer theory.
Okay.
One of the earliest and most persistent local rumors was that the murders were an act of vengeance or contract killing tied to Josiah Moore's business dealings. In particular, suspicion fell on Frank Fernando Jones, a wealthy Villisca resident, prominent businessman, and Iowa state senator. Jones had been Josiah Moore's employer for many years. Joe worked as the top salesman at Jones's farm equipment dealership until 1907, when he left to start his own competing implement business. Not only did Moore's departure create bad blood, but he also took a lucrative John Deere franchise with him, directly undermining Jones's enterprise. According to townsfolk, tensions between Jones and Moore deteriorated to open hatred. It was said that by 1912, the two men would pointedly cross the street to avoid greeting one another. On top of the business rivalry, local gossip alleged that Joe Moore had carried on a secret affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, Donna Jones, a claim for which no proof ever emerged. With purely rumor, the insinuation of a personal betrayal further inflamed the idea that Senator Jones might have held a murderous grudge against Moore. Few in Villisca believed that the 57-year-old Senator Jones would have snuck into the house to butcher children himself. Instead, the theory went, he hired an assassin to do the deed. The suspicion found a champion in James Jim Wilkerson, a private detective from the Burns Detective Agency who arrived in Villisca in 1915. Wilkerson became convinced that Jones had hired a notorious hired gun named William Blackie Mansfield to kill the Moore family. Mansfield was an ex-con and itinerant laborer with a violent reputation. Notably, in 1914, Mansfield had been the prime suspect in the brutal axe murders of his own wife, child, and in-laws in Blue Island, Illinois. Detective Wilkerson boldly accused Senator Jones and even Jones's son, Albert, of plotting the Villisca murders out of revenge, and he worked tirelessly to gather evidence against Mansfield as the contracted killer. Wilkerson's theory was bolstered by the observation that the Villisca crime was not unique. He pointed out that just a few days before Villisca, an almost identical axe murder of a husband and wife, Roland and Anna Hudson, had occurred on June 5, 1912 in Paola, Kansas, a town not far from a railway line. The victims were slain in bed, faces covered, doors locked, and an oil lamp left at the scene. Months earlier, in September 1911, two families had been slaughtered in Colorado Springs, Colorado, under very similar circumstances, and another family in Ellsworth, Kansas, in October 1911. Wilkerson believed many of these crimes, including Villisca, showed the same handiwork and peculiar signatures. Families murdered in their sleep with an axe, mirrors and windows covered, a lamp left burning low, a basin for washing up, and the weapon abandoned at the scene. In both the Villisca and Paola cases, for example, a lamp with the chimney removed was left at the foot of the bed, and in Villisca and Colorado Springs, all mirrors were draped with cloth. To Wilkerson and others, these correlations hinted at a single perpetrator. Wilkerson argued that William Blackie Mansfield was that man, a transient serial axe murderer who could be hired to kill on behalf of someone like Jones, who also killed others along the way. Under public pressure, a grand jury was indeed called in 1916 to hear Wilkerson's evidence. Mansfield was arrested and brought to Iowa for hearing in July 1916. During this process, witnesses were produced to support the theory. A restaurant owner in nearby Shenandoah testified he saw Mansfield on the morning of after the murders, boarding a train and claiming he had walked from Villisca. Another witness, Mrs. Vena Tompkins of Marshalltown, Iowa, was prepared to testify that she overheard 3 men plotting to murder the Moore family in the woods outside Villisca before the crime, implying a conspiracy possibly involving Jones, Mansfield, and an accomplice. Wilkerson also emphasized that whoever committed these murders wore gloves. No fingerprints were found, which he argued Mansfield would do since his fingerprints were on file from a prior incarceration in Leavenworth Prison. Despite these sensational claims, the case against Mansfield collapsed. His payroll records provided a rock-solid alibi, placing him in Illinois at the time of the Villisca killings and, crucially, also during the Paola, Kansas murders. Facing undeniable proof of Mansfield's elsewhere, the grand jury declined to indict him. Mansfield was quietly released and whisked out of town by the sheriff back to Kansas City. He later successfully sued Detective Wilkerson for wrongful arrest, winning $2,225 in damages, equivalent to about $65,000 today. The failure to pin the crime on Mansfield did not entirely exonerate Senator Jones in the court of public opinion. Many of Josiah Moore's relatives and friends remained convinced that Jones was behind it all, even if he never swung the axe himself. The feud between Wilkerson and Jones played out publicly for years. Wilkerson even accused Jones of using his influence to get Reverend Kelly indicted as a distraction from his own guilt. Jones, for his part, saw his once bright political career ruined by the cloud of suspicion. He lost re-election and faced social ostracism by those who believed the rumors. However, it must be noted that no hard evidence ever linked Frank Jones to the murder. Neither he nor his son Albert were ever charged. The Jones theory ultimately rested on circumstantial motives and on Wilkerson's assertions about Mansfield, which were never proven. Modern historians generally view the Jones as the mastermind theory with skepticism, citing the lack of any concrete tie between Jones and the crime scene or known participants. Still, this theory was a dominant one in Villisca's early narrative, a reflection of how personal and political intrigues in a small town could intertwine with horrifying crime.
So, Senator, real quick. I think the Senator one is a stretch. And I think
it is a huge stretch.
And I think it's to the fact that they knew there was bad blood between them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're just trying to pin it on somebody, get people to shut up about it, and move on. The witnesses, I'm gonna tell you right now, that's a crock of bullshit. There's some money being passed around. Hey, I need you to say 100%. This, and you won't be in trouble. Period. Just go up there and do what we said, and you're fine. So, and then Mansfield, okay, he was accused of killing some people in Illinois that was family, but that axe murder had no similarities, period, to these particular crimes. Because you don't just drape stuff over mirrors and windows, clean up at the scene, feed yourself, and then leave. And two,
Mhm.
there were cigarettes found. Okay, could you prove what kind? If he smoked, was it a roll your own, or were they filtered by a certain brand? You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I do.
So there's that. Um, I think cleaning the axe. I don't think dude probably wore gloves. He may have. Doubt it. It's probably why he cleaned the axe.
Agreed.
Um,
Well, you ready? Ready for the next one?
yeah.
Reverend George Kelly.
Okay.
Another major suspect, in fact, the only person ever tried in court for the Villisca murders was Reverend George Kelly. Reverend Kelly was a traveling Methodist minister and English immigrant who at first glance seemed an unlikely fiend. He was diminutive, only 5'2" and 119 pounds, and had a timid, eccentric demeanor. But those who knew Kelly or soon learned about him discovered a deeply troubled individual. Kelly had a history of mental instability dating back to a nervous breakdown in adolescence, and as an adult, he exhibited erratic and perverse behavior that got him into frequent trouble. He was fixated on sex and had been caught peeping into windows and propositioning young women and girls. In one instance, Kelly placed newspaper ads for a female stenographer and then sent obscene letters to respondents detailing that they would have to type in the nude, an offense for which he was eventually convicted in 1914. Crucially, Reverend Kelly was in Villisca on the night of the murders. He and his wife had come to nearby towns in southwest Iowa after visiting ministers. On June 9, 1912, Kelly attended the same Children's Day church program at the Presbyterian Church where the Moore family and Stillinger girls were present. Witnesses later recalled that Kelly had been behaving oddly at the event, perhaps even watching the Moore family's movements with unusual interest. In the early morning hours after the murders, at 5:19 a.m. on June 10th, Reverend Kelly boarded a westbound train out of Villisca, ostensibly leaving town before anyone knew what had happened. In a disturbing twist, passengers on the train reported that Kelly spoke to them about the Villisca murders before the bodies were even discovered. According to one account, Kelly told fellow travelers there were 8 dead souls back in Villisca, butchered in their beds, hours in advance of the public learning of the massacre. This inexplicable statement, if true, is one of the most damning pieces of evidence against Kelly. It suggests he had knowledge of the crime that only the killer or someone present at the scene could have had at the time. In the weeks following the murders, Reverend Kelly further drew attention to himself with his bizarre fascination on the case. He wrote multiple letters to police, investigators, and family members of the victims, rambling about the murders and even claiming to have heard sounds or witnessed the killings from afar. These unsolicited, detailed letters made authorities deeply suspicious. Was Kelly describing the scene so vividly because he had imagined it, due to his unstable mind, or because he had actually been there? Investigators from an agency responded trying to draw out more details from Kelly in correspondence. Around this time, some young girls in another town accused Kelly of attempted enticement, and his well-known sexual deviance, he often asked women and girls to pose nude for him, marked him as a disturbed individual. Though Kelly left Iowa after that summer, by 1914 he was in South Dakota and got arrested for sending obscene material through the mail. He was briefly confined to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a federal asylum in Washington, D.C. It was only after this, in 1916 and 1917, that Iowa law enforcement seriously targeted Kelly for the Villisca murders. Under the direction of Attorney General Havner, investigators re-interviewed witnesses and gathered new statements tying Kelly to the crime. Several key points emerged. Kelly's left-handedness. Coroner Lindquist had noted that the blood splatter patterns in the Morehouse suggested the killer likely wielded the axe left-handed. Reverend Kelly happened to be left-handed, which seemed to fit that detail. Bloody clothing. A laundry owner in a nearby town reported that around June 12, 1912, she received some bloody clothes from Reverend Kelly to be laundered. Kelly claimed the stains were from nosebleeds or chicken blood, but this discovery raised eyebrows. Early admission of being in Villisca. Kelly freely admitted to police that he had been in Villisca that fateful night and left in the pre-dawn morning hours. This put him in the vicinity at the right time, unlike many other suspects who had no known presence in town. Odd actions after the crime. About 2 weeks after the murders, Kelly returned to Villisca. In a macabre move, he joined a tour of the murder house by posing as an investigator from the Scotland Yard. Locals recalled this unsettling enthusiasm while inside the house. Such behavior, essentially crime scene voyeurism, painted Kelly as a man morbidly drawn to the scene of the slaughter. Incriminating statements. Beyond the alleged train remark, an elderly couple from Macedonia, Iowa, Mr. and Mrs. Allen, testified that when they saw Kelly on the morning of June 10, 1912, as he arrived in their town by train, he told them about the Villisca murders hours before the news had broken. Kelly supposedly said simply that there were horrible murders in Villisca and children had been killed, which the couple found odd and memorable. Notably, the couple later changed their story, introducing doubt, but initially their account was used against Kelly. By this time, Kelly was indicted in 1917. The case against him, though circumstantial, seemed substantial. Under interrogation, Kelly was in a fragile, suggestible state. After many hours of questioning, he capitulated and signed a confession on August 31st, 1917. In it, he claimed he killed the Moore children upstairs first, then the downstairs children, and that God whispered to me, "Suffer the children to come unto me," a perverse inversion of a Bible verse. He wrote that the word "slay utterly," the supposed title of a sermon he had heard, kept ringing in his head, compelling him to pick up the axe and do the awful deed. This confession, if taken at face value, is an admission of guilt. Kelly placed himself as the killer, motivated by a religious delusion. However, Kelly's confession was problematic. He was clearly mentally ill, and as soon as he recovered his wits, he retracted everything. His defense argued convincingly that Kelly was a man prone to hallucinations and had been browbeaten by investigators into confessing something he didn't do or couldn't remember. Furthermore, aspects of his confession did not perfectly match the known evidence. Some details seemed like lucky guesses or information he could have learned from newspapers. During Reverend Kelly's trial, the prosecution leaned heavily on his confession and his peculiar character, while the defense highlighted the lack of any physical evidence and the fact that several axe murders occurred elsewhere while Kelly was locked in an asylum, implying the Villisca killer could still be at large. The jury ultimately was not convinced beyond reasonable doubt. Kelly was acquitted and walked away a free man, albeit with his reputation destroyed and his mental condition no better. To this day, Reverend George Kelly remains a figure of controversy. He is the only person to have confessed to Villisca murders, yet a jury found that confession unreliable. He lived until 1950 in relative obscurity, and if he did carry the secrets of Villisca, he took them to his grave.
He went back west after Villisca, which doesn't make sense to me. Because the killer seems to be traveling.
Unless that's where the next church he was going to was.
Oh, that's
west.
true. That's true.
Like, that's what he did. He traveled from church to church.
And his preferred method of travel sounds like train.
Well, back then, that was really your only mode of travel if you were going long distances like that.
Yeah. And Scotland Yard, like, How many weeks is that?
Well, you got to remember he was English. He was British. He was a immigrant, so he had the accent. Had to explain that away somehow.
Yeah, but to get over to the United States, come through New York, and then travel by rail to Villisca, like that's a month. Hell, it might be more. I don't know how long it takes to go from New York to Scotland back then, or England, whatever you're gonna call
Yeah,
it. So,
yeah.
yeah,
I will say, in regards to his fascination with the case, if I was in a town and I had met this family, and then I found out later that that family got killed the night I met them, I'm gonna be curious.
oh yeah, I get that. I think what it sounds like to me, because he left the same day that it happened, it sounds like to me he may have been going toward the house and ran into the neighbor, and that
Maybe.
might be why he knows. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But at the same time, as we said earlier, palms were being greased back then for eyewitness testimony to this case.
I agree. I agree.
And
We're also 5 years after the fact,
yeah.
so yeah, I agree on that.
Yeah, so either people could have been paid off or people could have gotten details slightly wrong. Like the couple that says, oh, he told them before news had broke that he knew about the murders. It could have been after news broke and they just got the details wrong, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I still think Reverend
So
Kelly's probably not going to be your killer.
I don't either. I will say at the beginning, I was on board with Reverend Kelly.
But you would
Like
also
when I
think,
first heard about this case and I heard about Reverend Kelly, that's the guy. Like,
yeah. Well, I would
I mean,
think,
it fits. I get why he was such a big suspect.
yeah, I would think that Reverend Kelly would probably still be killing even after this,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no more, or nobody kept up with him to see if stuff like this continued
Yeah.
to happen after Reverend Kelly was indicted, or within the 5 years Kelly was being looked at.
Well,
So,
that being said, I also don't think Reverend Kelly is innocent. Like he was
no,
obviously a pervert and a pedophile.
well, yeah, I agree. I agree.
Obviously not a good dude.
Yeah,
But
I mean, most men are perverts in their own way, shape, form, or fashion, whether public or private.
yeah.
That's just that's our nature in a way. But
Yeah. But
what he
he
was
took it to a
into,
whole nother level.
yeah, I agree. I most definitely agree on that. So, but
Well, you ready for the next one? This is the early version of the man on the train theory, the one I buy into.
uh,
Okay?
well, I'm gonna tell you right now, we're at almost an hour and a half.
Oh, I'm aware. I'm aware. This is easily going to be our longest episode.
Yeah,
I would say let's split it up into two, but based on how good Kelly Hopkinsville mega episode did, I don't think it's a good idea.
well,
Let's just power through it.
I'm also getting hungry, and there's some shrimp and
Do
clams
what?
calling me. I said I'm starting to get hungry, and there's shrimp and clams starting to call. But
Then let's power through it. All right. The idea that Villisca's murder might have been part of a serial rampage did not start with modern authors. It actually originated with investigators in 1912 and 1913. As mentioned in the timeline, Special Agent Matthew McClory of the Justice Department suspected that a string of nightmarish axe murders across the country were connected. The suspect he focused on was Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Villisca Moors. Henry Lee Moore was a 38-year-old man with a checkered past. He had been released from a Kansas reformatory in 1911, not long before the Midwest murder spree began. Then, in late 1912, just months after Villisca, Henry Moore was arrested and later convicted for the axe murders of his own mother and grandmother in Columbia, Missouri. In that case, his motive was plain: inheritance of the family farm, and he was sentenced to life in prison for the double murder. McClory theorized that Henry Moore might be a roaming serial killer who had committed nearly 30 murders across the region, including the 8 in Villisca. At the time, newspapers and detectives gave this theory serious consideration. They noted the anomalies and pattern. Many of the crime scenes, like Colorado Springs, Villisca, and Paola, had the same peculiar hallmarks: heads covered, lamps dimmed, axes left behind, and proximity to train tracks. Henry Moore's known crimes fit the weapon and brutality profile. For a while, some believed Villisca was solved, pointing to Henry Moore as the likely culprit of all these atrocities and an early example of a traveling serial killer in America. However, as more facts emerged, Henry Moore as Villisca's killer fell out of favor. First, Moore's crime in Missouri had a clear financial motive, whereas none of the other murders involved robbery or personal gain, indicating a different psychological pattern. Second, some of the murders in the supposed chain occurred while Henry Moore was already in custody for the Columbia murders. And notably, certain signatures present at Villisca, like covering the victims' faces, were absent in Henry Moore's own crime. He did not cover his mother's face, for example. In short, Henry Moore appeared to be just one more axe murderer of the area, not necessarily the elusive serial killer responsible for Villisca and beyond. Modern scholars typically rule out Henry Moore as a viable suspect for Villisca. His story is nevertheless significant because it shows the authorities were aware of the serial killer possibility even back then. McClory had the right concept: one man committing multiple family murders by axe along rail lines, but likely the wrong man. The string of Midwest axe murders that he cataloged remains central to understanding Villisca. McClory's multi-murder theory was visionary, but ultimately unprovable. Henry Moore died in prison, never confessing to anything beyond his family's double murder.
Yeah, I think that was kind of far-fetched on their part. Another trying to pin it on somebody that had nothing to do with it. Just trying to bring it into.
Well, I don't believe Henry Moore was the man on the train, but I do believe in the man on the train theory.
Most definitely. I mean, that's where I'm going with this.
So the man on the train theory, that's what we're getting into now. They stretch from Rainier, Washington to Illinois and Iowa.
And that's where they stop?
These are... Do what?
That's where it stops?
Yeah, on a map. On a map.
Okay.
Like, if you put pins in all of the cases involved in this theory, the pins stop in Iowa. Right around Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, that area.
Okay.
Okay? But here are the common factors, okay? Entire families bludgeoned to death in their homes at night. A blunt axe or similar tool used, but taken from the home. So basically, he didn't bring the murder weapon with him.
Right.
It was something he picked up once he got there. Okay? Houses located in close proximity to railroad tracks. The killer covering victims' faces and windows, and in many cases, the weapon being left at the scene. The murders typically occurred on weekends and during warmer months when windows might be open and when transient workers are on the move. Okay?
Okay.
Contemporary newspapers dubbed it an Axeman problem, an epidemic of axe murders sweeping across rural America. The Colorado Springs murders of September 1911 were often compared side by side with Villisca. In Colorado Springs, an entire household was slaughtered in the night, the Burnham family and a neighboring family named Wayne, a total of 6 victims. In a very similar fashion, with bedcloths over the heads, lamps left burning, and the killer washing up. The Paola, Kansas double murder of June 5th, 1912, just 4 days before Villisca, was practically a dress rehearsal for Villisca. 2 victims in bed, faces covered, axe left, chimneyless lamp, etc. Papers also pointed to the Ellsworth, Kansas case of October 1911, the Showman family, 5 victims, where bizarrely the killer had even covered the household telephone with a cloth, perhaps to silence a phantom ring, or as one criminologist mused, because he feared the eyes of any reflective or human-like object in the house. In Villisca, every mirror was covered. In Ellsworth, the telephone was covered. Such details are too specific to ignore. By 1910s, a few detectives theorized that a single itinerant axeman was riding the rails and committing these crimes. McLaury's suspect Henry Lee Moore, but as we discussed, that was likely incorrect. Nonetheless, the notion of a mobile serial killer survived in the lore of the case. The infamous Axeman of New Orleans in 1918 and 1919, where a killer attacked people with an axe and sometimes left cryptic letters, further reinforced the motif of an axe murderer on the loose. Though that was a somewhat different context, urban and likely a different perpetrator. Fast forward to the 21st century, the Villisca case continued to draw interest, and the unsolved nature invited fresh analysis. In 2017, celebrated true crime author Bill James, along with his daughter Rachel McCarthy James, published an exhaustive book titled The Man on the Train, The Solving of a Century-Old Serial Killer Mystery. Their research began, in fact, with an attempt to solve the Villisca case and expanded into a nationwide investigation of similar crimes. Using digital newspaper archives and computer searches, the Jameses scoured thousands of small-town reports to identify patterns. What they uncovered was astonishing. By aggregating old reports that were never connected at the time, they found dozens of likely related axe murders of families between roughly 1898 and 1912. The Villisca massacre, they concluded, was part of a much larger killing spree by a single offender, a man who got away with it because police in different jurisdictions never realized they were chasing the same man. The Jameses' suspect turned out to be a long-forgotten figure, Paul Mueller, a German immigrant. Paul Mueller was the sole suspect in an 1897 murder of a family in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, where a case where a mother, father, and child were bludgeoned on their farm, the murder of the Newton family. Mueller, a hired farmhand, vanished after the crime and was never caught. The Jameses proposed that Mueller then became a serial killer, moving across the country, possibly working as a lumberjack or rail worker, and killing entire families near railroad lines. By their count, Villisca was among the last of his American crimes. By the time he came to Villisca, the man from the train had been murdering randomly selected families for a decade and a half. After 1912, the murders that fit the pattern mysteriously stopped in the U.S., leading the Jameses to speculate that Mueller perhaps hopped a ship back to Europe, potentially connecting him to the infamous 1922 Hinterkaifeck farm massacre in Germany, which we will cover at a later date. Okay. So here, you got a thought?
Here's my thought. I think his
Did
weapon.
you strike a thought?
I think his weapon changed.
Possibly. I personally buy into the theory that he was responsible for Hinterkaifeck. Like, you take what happened in Villisca, Hinterkaifeck is almost identical.
Okay.
And it's only 10 years later.
Well, he's not going to stop killing for 10 years. At this point, he's killed for 10 years straight. He hasn't stopped at this point.
I
I think.
I agree. I think Hinterkaifeck might be a a part of a larger spree in Europe.
He may hopped a boat, but I bet you
Yeah.
if they were to look at bludgeoned murders of families near railroad tracks that didn't involve an axe, I bet you they come out with some more.
Yeah. So, number of compelling factors. Okay, across many of the crime scenes, we see the same unusual touches. The killer used the blunt side of an axe, likely to avoid getting stuck in bone on the first blow. He nearly always covered the victim's faces with cloth. He often covered windows and mirrors in the house. A kerosene lamp with the chimney removed and wick low was left burning in at least 5 of the cases, including Villisca, Paola, Ellsworth, and Rainier. The killer frequently lingered after the murders. In Villisca, he stayed to eat and wash. In Colorado Springs, he similarly washed and possibly even fed the baby of one victim, so some accounts claim. In several scenes, a household bowl or basin of bloody water was found, indicating the murderer washed his hands or the axe, and often a household axe was used and left behind. The murderer carried no gun, which suggests stealth and surprise were his primary weapons. Then there's the proximity to railroads. The Jameses found that the vast majority of these axe murders occurred in homes located very near railroad tracks, usually within a few hundred yards. Villisca's Moore House, for example, is not far from the Burlington Railroad line that runs through town. The town of Villisca itself is a railway hub. The significance is that the killer likely hopped off a freight train, committed murders in the dead of the night, and then escaped by hopping on a departing train before sunrise. Hence why I said earlier I don't think he was in the house when the neighbor came through. I think he had already hopped on the train. I think he had to leave when he did because that's when the train was leaving.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. He knew the
Okay?
departing schedule, and yeah, probably realized
Yeah,
what time it
he's
was.
on a
He was
time
like,
frame.
yeah,
Yep. In one case, the killer may have had to flee sooner than intended because a train was coming. The Lyerly family murder in 1906 in North Carolina, covered in the James's book, ended with the killer leaving 2 daughters alive and the front door open, possibly because he heard a train whistle and ran to catch the train. Trains provided a perfect getaway. A stranger boarding at odd hours attracted little notice in those days, and once the train left the station, he'd be miles away before the crime was discovered. Then temporal clustering. There was a surge of such crimes in 1911 and 1912, suggesting a serial offender in his most active period came at the tail end of a frenzy that included Paola, Kansas, Columbia, Missouri, the crime that Henry Moore committed against his family, which might have been a coincidence in timing, and earlier multiple incidents in the fall of 1911. The sudden stop after 1912 is also telling. Perhaps the killer realized law enforcement was catching on, or he left the country. Bill James notes that after Villisca, these specific types of crimes ceased in the U.S., strengthening the case that Villisca's killer and the serial killer were one and the same. Then there was a lack of motive. In all of these cases, no robbery or rape was conclusively found as a motive. Nothing of value was taken from the Moore home, for instance, and aside from the speculation about Lena Stillinger's positioning, there was no sexual assault. This aligns with the idea that the killer, who murders for some internal compulsion rather than financial gain or personal vendetta, a hallmark of a serial killer rather than a typical criminal or someone with a personal grudge, the sheer savagery, overkill blows, especially on Josiah Moore, who was hit possibly as many as 30 times, suggests rage, but against whom? If the killer didn't even know the victims, as the serial theory posits, the rage was generalized. perhaps a product of a deranged mind or hatred for humanity. Bill James theorized that Paul Mueller might have had a peculiar fixation on young girls and perhaps perpetrated the crimes partly to molest prepubescent girls. Several of the families murdered had daughters around 10 to 12 years old, as Villisca did. However, the lack of clear evidence of sexual assault leaves that aspect speculative. Contemporary awareness. It lends credence to the theory that even at the time, authorities saw the linkage. For example, an Omaha newspaper in 1912 ran a story explicitly connecting Villisca with the Colorado Springs and Monmouth murders, calling it likely the work of a madman who had struck multiple times. Federal agent McLaury's involvement indicates the government thought a multi-state killer was plausible. If those closest to the events had that intuition, it gives weight to the modern re-examination. And then modern analytical confirmation. The Jameses, using modern analytical techniques, compiled a list of 9 cases they feel 100% certain were committed by the same man. Villisca is among those 9. While we must note that this is their professional opinion, not a courtroom certainty, their work has been praised for its thoroughness. Crime writers and experts have pointed out that the Jameses successfully identified a viable suspect with known presence at one crime and plausible ability to commit others. No one previously had tied the 1897 Massachusetts case to the Midwest spree. That connection is a major revelation in the man on the train theory.
Okay.
What you think?
I think he continued killing. Though he may have left the country at some point.
You think what?
I think he continued killing. I just think his choice of weapon changed.
That's possible, or he left the country and went back to Europe.
Yeah. He's not going to depart from the West Coast. If he did, that's a hell of a ride.
I mean, if he's just traveling by train, he's going wherever the train's going. You know what I mean?
If I had to guess.
And just when the train stops, he hops off, kills a family, hops back on the next train that's leaving town.
If I had to guess, he probably departed from the East Coast, which would be the shortest boat ride to Europe and everything.
I agree.
And a killing spree through Europe, like, I don't know how well Europe's records were at the time. So, I'm kind of with you, kind of with him on this theory.
My theory suggests that Villisca scared him. Remember the North Carolina case we mentioned where the 2 girls woke up and survived because he had to leave?
Mm-hmm.
I think that scared him. And then when it happened again in Villisca with Lena Stillinger waking up and fighting back, I think he was like, okay, it's only a matter of time before I get caught. So he left the country. Went back to Europe. Where then, 10 years later, he committed the Hinter-Kaifak murders.
Yeah.
Possibly many more. Okay. So who is Paul Mueller? Okay. Paul Mueller is the name put forward as the likely serial killer. According to the man on the train, Mueller was a German or Austrian immigrant with a violent streak. After the 1897 Brookfield, Massachusetts murders, where the entire Newton family was killed with a blunt object, a year-long manhunt for Mueller yielded nothing. He vanished. The Jameses suggest he then began a nomadic life, possibly working in logging camps or on railroads, and killing when the opportunity and urge struck. Mueller's presumed method was to pick up isolated houses near train tracks, usually late in the night when the date was transitioning. Sundays into Mondays were a favorite, and Villisca's murders occurred late Sunday night into Monday morning. He likely watched the household quietly, hiding in barns or woods, then entered in the very early morning hours. One chilling detail common in these crimes: the family dog often remained undisturbed, suggesting the killer might have even fed or pacified pets to keep them quiet. In Villisca, no reports of a barking dog were noted, and in Colorado Springs, one of the family's dogs was similarly quiet. These subtle touches indicate the killer's uncanny composure and preparation. After Villisca, the Jameses tracked Paul Mueller to a possible sighting in Oregon, and then theorized he left the U.S. the next time a Villisca-style crime occurs is 10 years later in Germany, Hinterkaifeck, which they admit is speculative but intriguing. Hinterkaifeck involved a family on a farm killed with a pickaxe, and some similarities like covering faces and long-term hiding on the property were noted. The suspect Mueller might have returned to Europe and continued his crimes there. And here we go again.
Right, I'm back.
All right, hang on just a second here.
Yeah, it's around that 50th an hour mark that my shit just fucking crashes.
Yeah, we got one more section, and that's counter arguments to this theory. And then we can talk about whether or not we agree on it, and then we'll be done. I know we've been recording for an hour 44 at this point, but
Yeah.
I told you this is a long one.
Yeah, and I got them waiting on me in there, so that's the issue.
Yeah, I still haven't eaten dinner yet. So
You want to try to
So the
pick
man
back
on
up
the
on
tree-
this, or
do what?
you want to try to pick back up on this and just finish it later?
Considering we only have one section left, I say let's just finish it real quick. Okay. So the man on the train theory, while widely praised for its ingenuity and scope, is not without skeptics. Counterpoints include the lack of direct evidence, confounding variables, Mueller's hypothetical psychology, local familiarity versus randomness, why Villisca, and then the series termination. Okay? So basically, like, why did he stop?
Mm-hmm.
After weighing the evidence, many experts find the man on the train theory highly persuasive. As one criminologist put it, It makes perfect sense, a far better explanation than any other for Villisca. The Villisca Axe murders, in this view, were not a unique act of family hatred or a lone lunatic's rage at a specific people, but rather the tragic result of crossing paths with a prolific serial killer who moved from town to town, leaving shattered families in his wake. More than 110 years have passed since the Villisca Axe murders, yet the case endures in the public imagination. A dark puzzle from the past that still beckons to investigators, authors, and ghost hunters alike. In the absence of definitive solution, Villisca's story has been kept alive through books, documentaries, tours, and even paranormal tourism. Okay. Ultimately, the Villisca case stands as a sobering reminder of the fragility of safety. In a pretty place where doors were left unlocked, an unfathomable evil visited and slipped away. The community of Villisca was never the same. The crime quite literally haunted the town's identity and even changed how Americans viewed their locks and their neighbors. For the 8 victims, Joe, Sarah, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, Paul, Lena, and Ina, we can only hope that in some way the continued retelling of their story keeps their memory alive and honors them. The Villisca Axe murderer, whoever he was never brought to justice in a courtroom. But through the diligent work of researchers and the power of historical hindsight, perhaps the truth of his identity has finally come to light on the pages of analysis and in the collective consciousness. And if so, the long silence protecting a mass murderer's name has at last been broken. A small measure of posthumous justice for a crime that will never be forgotten.
All right.
So what do you think?
I'm with the theory on the man on the train.
You buy it?
I buy it.
Okay. And I highly recommend everybody listening to this go read that book. Or they've got an audio version. Look into it. They go into tremendous detail on each individual case, even a ton of cases that they ultimately settle on not being linked. They still include it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like the audiobook version is the one I did, and it's nearly 12 hours long.
Yeah. But I'm going to cut this kind of quick to the end because I need to get off.
Yeah,
here.
you're fine. You're fine. I need to eat too and get to bed because I got to be up at fucking 3:30 in the morning, and it is currently 8:30 at night. So.
Yeah. So
go ahead and
guys,
close us out, you beautiful monster.
Listen, we appreciate y'all sticking around for this whole shenanigans and everything and listening to us once again. I know it's Valentine's weekend. Y'all go spend time with your Valentine, have fun. If you don't have one, go find you one. Maybe you'll find you.
Well, it won't be by the time they see this.
Well, that's just true.
This one isn't going up until, let's see, this weekend is Magnolia, then Blue Book. This one will be up on the 28th.
Okay. Well, hopefully y'all found a permanent Valentine by the time y'all see this. Other than that, hey, remember, go like, share, subscribe. Follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And, hey, until next time, you beautiful motherfuckers, y'all have a good one.
All right. Later, brother.
All right, bud.